everyone, I'm Mrs. B, this is the Art Life YouTube channel, and I'm going to guide you in creating a really cool, bright landscape today. Now, this series is called Minimal Materials because all you need is a piece of paper and some colouring in stuff, and you'll be able to create something really cool like this, because I'll guide you every step of the way. We're going to play a game called Code Word. So in this video, later on at some point, there is going to be a secret code word that I give you. Now, if you remember that code word, write it down in the comments straight away. I will pick someone who has commented the correct code word and I'll give them a super awesome shout out in a future video. So if you'd love to be shouted out in a video that's coming up, make sure that you find that code word, write it down in the comments, and I might pick you. Now, in today's video, I will teach you all about what it means to create a landscape and give you a few strategies for creating one that makes sense. Please make sure that you subscribe, and comment below if you like the video or if you'd like to ask me any questions about it. Let's get started. The materials that you will need for this drawing-based task is just a plain piece of A4 paper. You might also choose to do this task on a larger scale on an A3 piece of paper if you have it. You'll also need a black marker or texture of some sort and whatever colouring materials you have available to you. Today, before doing any drawing, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about landscapes. Now, landscapes is a type of artwork. Well, it's essentially the subject of an artwork, and it's a subject that many artists throughout history have tried to depict in their art in many different forms and various different ways. For example, Impressionists loved looking at landscapes because they used to paint outside. So they would paint en plein air, which in French means to paint outside in the elements, whether it's windy, raining, snowing, sunny, windy, whatever. They would paint outside and often look at what was around them, generally being a landscape. A landscape is essentially land, but it doesn't necessarily have to be land. A landscape could also be the ocean. It's really just a scape of something outside. Now, when creating a landscape, it's very important to make it proportional, which means it's within the correct scale. Everything makes sense. For example, if I were to put a tree in the background, it needs to be smaller than a tree right in the front. I'll get into that later. Another thing is that you need to consider the different sections within a landscape. I'll show you what I mean. Say this is my artwork. I might start with, say, a horizon line. This is just a special word for the ground, or sometimes the ocean, depending on what you're trying to create. Now, whatever is behind the horizon line, that's going to be the background. This section here is our background. Now, anything that's sort of here at the front, it's called our foreground. Front foreground, so the F helps us to remember that word. And then anything in the middle, you can probably guess, is the middle ground. And we need to consider these sections when we're creating a landscape. So what you might choose to do first, and what I like to do when creating a landscape, is work from the back forward. So you might think of something you might want to do in the background. For example, you could do some mountains or some hills, depending on where you are, what type of landscape you're looking at. There you go, some mountains there. They're in my background. Now I could also create something a little bit further forward and do some more hills that are more in the middle ground. Now anything that I create down here, like some little details of some flowers. Maybe there's a bit of a lake. That's obviously in my foreground, and it's going to be the biggest objects because it's the closest to the person that's looking at it. If I were to draw a flower in the background, it wouldn't make sense if I drew it the same size as the one in the foreground. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And that's because whatever is furthest away gets smaller. Gets smaller and smaller and smaller the further it is away. So these mountains are really far away in my picture here, in my practice. So if I'm going to draw a flower, really, they would just be tiny little dots. Probably wouldn't be able to see much detail at all because they're so far away into the background. Now, creating a landscape, it's important to consider these layers, consider these sections, and draw something in each of the sections. This creates depth. Depth within an artwork or a landscape is really important because it means if you look at the artwork, it looks like it goes really far off into the distance. Check out this strategy. If I put a dot here, and then I draw a straight diagonal line, and then another straight diagonal line, and some tiny little lines getting a little bit bigger as we get closer to the foreground, all of a sudden it looks like my artwork goes far off into the distance and that these mountains are really, really far away. This is called a one-point perspective, and you might choose to do that in your landscape today. Another thing you can do, as I said before, is if you're to draw some things in the middle ground or the background, is to draw them smaller. If I'm drawing some trees, I would draw them really small on this horizon line here to suggest that they're far off into the distance. There. So there's a few strategies when it comes to creating landscapes. We're going to put them to practice right now in our artwork. And I'm going to draw everything in my thick black texture first today just to save time. However, you might choose to draw it all in a pencil first, just in case you make some mistakes. As I did with my practice, I'm going to start with a horizon line. Now, I'm going to consider my background. With your landscape, you do not in any way need to copy me. You might choose to do an island landscape or a snowy mountaintop landscape or a desert, in which case whatever goes in your background would look different to mine. Today I'm going to do a bit more of a garden sort of farmscape, I suppose. So what would be in my background are some hills. Drawing as neatly as we possibly can. I want to draw something in my middle ground here. So I'm just going to draw a little mountain or hillscape in front. Cool. Now I'm going to move forward to my foreground and consider some cool things that I might want to put in the front here. Firstly, I want to do some detail. So I might do a few bigger flowers like this. Because I'm drawing with a thick black texture, I need to make sure that the things I draw aren't too small. Because if I drew a small flower, that's kind of what it would look like, and I don't want that. So that's why I've drawn them a little bit bigger in my foreground here. I might draw one on this side. And to make my artwork have depth, I'm going to do that one-point perspective. I'm going to draw a dot right there. I'm going to have my line be a bit wobbly this time, make it a bit more of a path. But it just means that I need to start at my horizon line. I need to start at the same point. It needs to be skinny at the start and gradually get a bit wider as it gets closer to the foreground. So now it looks like I'm looking into the painting or into the picture there. Now I feel like I need something interesting in my midground here. Don't you think? There's lots of different options. I might do a bit of a lake with some reeds. It's looking a little bit boring at the moment, but I promise it will look more interesting once we add some colour. Now what I'm doing is just adding some details into each of the sections. I've got my sun here to add interest to my background. And notice I've done the rays and I've created sort of different sections here. It's because I'm going to colour each of them with some different patterns. So creating sort of different sections might be a good idea within your drawing. I'd love to see your final products. Feel free to take photos and either tag me on my Instagram page, which is at artlife.melb, or I have a Facebook group which is called Artlife art lessons. And I've had lots of art teachers and students send me pictures of how they've had a go with the lessons I've popped up here, so it'd be awesome to see how you're going with it. I might just draw some rocks. Awesome, well this is a very simple, very basic kind of landscape that I've drawn. I've just made it up in my head. I'm not painting outside, I'm in my kitchen. So this is not on plein air, this is on Mrs. B's imagination. So I assume that's probably what you'll do too, but if you have the opportunity to go outside and actually draw a landscape that's in front of you, that is awesome. Okay, so if you've drawn in a pencil, it is now time for you to grab your marker, your thick black, something bold marker, and go over all the lines that you want to keep. Do that as neatly as possible, and then obviously rub out any grey lead marks that you can see so that you have a result that looks something like this, ready to add colour to. Now today, when I'm going to add colour, obviously you could just colour in realistically. That's one option. An option that a lot of artists throughout history have had a go at creating an artwork or a landscape that looks like the real thing, as if you were outside and you were taking a photo. But today, we're going to make it a little bit more colourful than that. So we're going to do the opposite and have a go at creating something a bit more abstract. And the way we're going to make it abstract is because we're going to use the element of patterns, lines, and shapes to make a kind of boring landscape, let's be honest, a little bit more interesting and a little bit more bright and colourful. Now that means when we're using our textures or crayons, we're going to have a go at thinking of some shapes and some lines that we can add to make each section really interesting. Now you can choose to use realistic colours. For example, if you're doing the lake, you would do your patterns in blue still. You can still do realistic colours if you prefer, or you can mix it up and completely change the colour scheme and go crazy with colour. But in each section that you've sort of created here, you're going to have a go at coming up with a new pattern, a new design based on colours, lines, and shapes. These are some art elements. Art elements are essentially the things that an artist puts into their artwork to make it more interesting. Just like a chef puts ingredients like flour, eggs, milk, and mixes it all together to make pancakes, we put art elements in to make our artworks look awesome and different to everyone else's. So I'm going to enjoy adding lines, whatever lines you like. Please, please, please do not copy exactly what I'm doing. I'm here just to give you a bit of guidance, here to give you some ideas. If you've got crayons, obviously, you can use those. If you've got textures, we need to be a little bit neater because they're super, super bold. You can see here, I'm just mixing up the type of lines that I'm doing, and I'm going to try not to repeat ones I've already done. So I've done wavy lines here and spots here. I need to come up with something completely different in the other sections. These awesome textures are called Artline sticks. They're sort of like a brush marker, and you can see they're really easy to use and super bright. I get them from a place called Zart Art, where I get all of my materials, and I've given you a link down below if you would like to get some for yourself. They're not too expensive at all. What you'll notice is I'm doing sort of all of the patterns first in a texture, and then what I'm going to do is colour over the top like this with crayons because they're a bit lighter. Now, if you don't have both of these products at home, you can adapt this task a little bit by just working with texture or just working with crayons. Obviously, it will look a little bit different, but that's perfectly fine. Today's code word, everybody, is McChicken. So this is my completed sort of first step within my patterns. I've really taken my time to make it as neat as possible, and I'd hope that you guys have too. I've finished with my textures, and what I'm going to do now is just spend some time finding a colour that matches each of the sections and just colouring it in to finish it off and make sure that every section has colour without any white gaps, and that will just create a really fantastic outcome and show a lot of perseverance and commitment to your task and your artwork, and hopefully create something that you're really proud of because you've put in a lot of effort and added a lot of detail to your landscape today. There we go. I'm really pleased with the outcome of that. I think that looks super bright and colourful. I've worked really hard to make sure that my patterns are as neat as possible, and when I coloured in, I really tried to get all those white gaps so that all you can see is beautiful, bright, abstract, colourful landscape. I really hope you enjoy this task and you have learnt a little bit about landscapes and abstract artworks. So it's as simple as that. This is a really fun task, and I hope you've enjoyed it too, creating your very own landscape. I also hope that yours looks a little bit different to mine and you've been able to use your creative brain to come up with something new using the strategies that I've shown you. Thanks for joining me today. Make sure you check out all the other Art Life videos because there's heaps there for you, and have a wonderful day.